Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Open Bible, Open Life podcast. I'm Kyle Mercer, and today I've got one of my favorite guests, the man, the myth, the legend, Matt Jernigan, all the way from Lexington. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks, Kyle.
Do you listen to this podcast?
I do.
Regularly, consistently?
Weekly.
Okay, so you've been a long-time listener, first-time guest.
That's right.
We're glad you're here. All the way from Lexington, North Carolina. How long did it take you from when you go from your house to our building? How long did that take you?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, so not too bad. Now, there's so much I want to talk about today. I mean, we'll see. We may have to come back for a second episode at some point. But let's just start, I want our listeners to know this, that you are underneath God's sovereignty and some other great gifted people, godly people in our church. You are going to be one of the biggest reasons why we're doing this Lexington Community Gathering that we hope becomes a campus. And so what I wanted to do today is I want to get you on the podcast. I want to hear your story as one of our key lay leaders down there. I want to hear about Lexington. And I want to just talk together about what's happening. I mean, we're kind of in between when this is being filmed and recorded. We're in between two interest meetings. We had our first interest meeting, just to catch everyone up, 113 adults, 24 kids. So we're getting close to 150 people interested in this. We're having another interest meeting coming up. By the time that this podcast comes out, that interest meeting will be over. So we'll get there toward the end. I want to start with Matt Jernigan. Born and raised in Lexington, correct?
That's it.
Tell me the story. I need to hear about your childhood a little bit. What's it like growing up in Lexington?
Yeah, just a good country place to live.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
The average person in Lexington, if there's such a thing, what are they like?
They hunt and they fish.
They hunt and they fish. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they like to own a lot of land if they can.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
So you grew up there. Tell us about your family. Did you grow up in a Christian home?
Yes, I grew up going to church weekly. I grew up in a split home. Mother and father were divorced early, but I grew up going to church with mom every weekend.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you become a Christian?
So my earliest memory of hearing the gospel was on a church bus. The church buses.
Yeah,
the kids
we don't have a church bus. Maybe one day. Yes.
Yeah. But I was on a church bus, and the church bus driver actually came back and just started sharing the gospel with me, and that was my earliest
How old
recollection.
Are you, roughly?
Probably 8 or 10 years old.
Okay.
Somewhere in that ballpark. And but then when I was 16 years old, I went to a youth retreat. I was in a local Methodist church in Lexington, and really felt the Holy Spirit call me. And I actually did a really Baptist thing as a Methodist. I walked down the aisle.
Come on.
Went to the altar and said the prayer. And so,
Amen.
And so my life.
How old were you roughly?
Since.
You were
16.
16 years old. Okay.
Yep.
Now you had, I don't know what all we'll get into, but you've had, multiple, how would I say it? Like defining events in your life, like we all have. Talk to us a little bit about your dad and his passing.
Yeah.
I know you were young, he was young.
Yeah.
And but that's a fork in the road for you.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
God used it for good, of course. As the story of Joseph says, the devil may want it for evil, but God used it for good. Tell us that story, because I think some of our listeners would be very interested to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, that was a profound time in my life, and certainly something that God used in my life for good. So, I was 19 years old at the time and working, in the funeral industry, and got a phone call, and my stepbrother had told me that my dad had just passed away, and it was pretty bluntly given to me, and so I kind of got the story, and he was driving down the road headed to go hunting, like normal,
like a good
Lexington
Lexington man.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And just 45 miles an hour down the road, and a tree fell across his truck and killed him. And so obviously, being in the funeral industry, I had dealt with death all my life from the time I turned 16 on, and but I had never dealt with it like that.
Yes.
And such a tragedy. And to begin with, that's the way I saw it, as an absolute tragedy, and it was. But now I see it as really a turning point in my life. It actually was probably the most important event to shape my career into what it's become. I talk to my staff a lot about the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Yes.
And until you've been through something like that, it's hard to really be empathetic.
Yes. Talk to us a little bit. We'll go all over the place today. Talk to us about what you do for a living. You referenced it here, but tell us,
So,
what do you do?
Yeah. So, well, that's changed over time, but When I was 16 years old, 2006, same year I met my wife, I started working in funeral service with my grandfather. He was a co-owner of a funeral home, and started doing that as a co-op for work. For school, and so I kind of thought that's kind of where it would lead, and didn't know that I would ever really be called to that. And there was a big pivotal moment in my life to where I felt the full call on my life to be in funeral service, and that was I had a don't want to just tell sad stories.
No, yeah, please.
But I had a 5-year-old kid that I helped coach with my uncle, and he passed away. I mean, it was extremely tragic. He had pneumonia and passed away.
I'm so sorry.
And so I walked in from school and just kind of checking on everything, and there he was. And so it was really tragic to me. But being able to walk with his family through that process really just solidified my call in funeral service, and just really filled my heart just to be able to serve people in a time like that. And so that's what I've done. And I was licensed as a funeral director in 2014, and I've done that since. And of course, now I've moved into more of a managerial role in ownership, and my partner and I manage 35 people and 3 funeral homes. And
how do you, in the funeral business, we can move on from this, but I'm just interested, how in the funeral business do you not get hardened by death or these experiences? I mean, I'm thinking of it, I don't know what I'm talking about. I've never owned one. But I think similar to doctors, where they talk about, that you can get calloused and you can get so used to giving bad news or seeing patients die, or in your case, just funeral after funeral, young people, all this. Like, how have you kept your heart soft, and how have you kept being like relational and personal and pastoral as you've done this? Yeah.
Well, I mean, no question, it's my mission field.
Yeah, I bet.
It's a ministry for sure. And I think that there is a temptation to kind of harden your heart as you see these things, particularly babies. And, it's one thing to serve the family who grandmother has been praying to die.
She's 98. She fell asleep with the Bible on her chest. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that's one thing. But the newborn, the stillborn, month-old, that kind of thing, that's a whole different family to deal with. And I think the main thing that I've used to help me deal with that and not get hardened to it is I'm very emotionally connected to the families I serve, and so I really put myself where they are, and in doing so, obviously, I'm being so emotionally connected, it would be impossible to get hardened.
Yeah, that's good.
When you're trying to go to where.
And I guess that's part of I think of Lexington as a small town in the best sense of the word, and so I'm guessing that even a lot of times someone comes in or a funeral, needs to be done, and you may already know the families. I'm sure you're meeting a lot of families, but I'm just because you've been there for a long time.
Many times.
Okay, you mentioned, was it you said the same year your dad the same time you came to Christ is when you met Chelsea.
Just after, yeah. So I was 16.
You're now wife, just to clarify for all the
everything happened all in 1 year.
Yeah. So and what I loved about that was, and we'll get to this too, but you guys were in our community group, and I remember at one point Chelsea said to our group, when I married Matt Jernigan, I knew I was never leaving Lexington, North Carolina. Right. What do you love about Lexington so much?
Just being so rooted there, and the people. You kind of alluded to it, but everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
It's kind of still that good old boy town.
Yes.
For comparison, Winston-Salem has over 200,000.
Yeah, over 250,000 people. Yep.
Yeah. Lexington has 20,000.
Yes. So 10% or less.
Big difference.
Yeah, big difference.
So everybody knows everybody really is, you can't go anywhere without knowing someone there.
Yeah.
And so it's just the tight-knit community that I've always loved, and just, the people.
Now, when I'm driving up 52, just talk to me about this for a second. There's Lexington, and then there is Welcome. Okay, I mean, it's got to be a friendly place. It's called Welcome. I mean, do Lexington people and Welcome people hang out?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about Midway? When we get Midway, is that like? Do you consider people who live in Midway? I mean, it is called Midway. Are they more like go to Winston, or are they more come down to Lexington?
They're still Davison County people for the most part, but.
Are they the Kernersville? They could go Greensboro, they could go Winston, but okay. Yeah. It's okay. All right, I want to talk about how you, from Lexington, you're not the only one. I don't even know if you are the first person. I don't think you were the first person ever to come from Lexington to our church. But our church is 8 years old. You've been coming around for how many years now?
Since 2019, I believe.
Okay, so 5 years. So you were not with us in our Goaler days, but when we were in the Northwest Boulevard warehouses, which are now our student center, I remember meeting you early on. We'll get to this. You were in my community group. We were both in the same community group with our friend Andy Jump.
Yeah.
How did you hear about Two Cities, and how did you and your family decide? Because I know there's a lot of families in Lexington who maybe they've heard about us, they didn't come up. What made you and your family decide to visit for the first time and then be a part of Two Cities? Tell that story.
Yeah, so the providence of God.
Yeah.
Nothing other than that. And so I was actually working a funeral service out of our Hickory Tree location in Winston, and had a funeral at a church local here, and literally just drove by Two Cities, and I saw the slogan, "In Winston for the world."
Yes.
And I just felt pulled.
Yeah.
And so I went home, told Chelsea about it. We came that week. And
never looked back.
The rest is history. Yeah.
So you guys came, at first you guys was there anybody else that you knew here from Lexington when you first came?
No, I didn't meet anybody from Lexington until sometime like mid 2020, just before COVID.
Yeah. You were here 6 months before any of that, and then we'll get to this. You started bringing everybody. You got the church van in the church bus and started picking them up.
Yeah.
Okay, so you come. Tell us about your journey of just getting connected here. So you and your kids, obviously, we're in our kids' ministry, still are in our kids' ministry. You guys join a community group. I think remind me if we had a connection already, just meeting each other. But I think part of the reason that you joined our community group was it was hosted in Ardmore. Which was central in Winston. In other words, you didn't have to come. Obviously, you're not going to go up to King or that area, or even for you to go over all the way to Louisville, Clemens. That's going to be farther for you. So it was the closest place. So talk about how did you go from you're in a community group to, man, I think I want to start one, and I think I want to start one in Lexington. Yeah. So that's a window of like 2 or 3 years. So I know it's a long stage, and part of that's COVID and all that. Tell that story.
Yeah. So the way I got into your community group, I didn't know it was your community group at all. It said
I don't know if I know this part.
Yeah, it said the Jellison Community Group. DJ and Brittany Jellison, great.
That's right.
folks.
When you first came, they were leading before they went to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
To help with that church plant.
That's exactly right. So I actually somehow broke the Two Cities code. And figured out how to log in and find the open groups before I went to a weekender. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, I don't know how you did that.
But I got into a group and was signed up for a weekender. And then when I like to tell people this story, but when I showed up to the house, I just saw it was the closest one to Lexington that I could find. And I showed up to the house, and there was Kyle Mercer at the door. I was like,
it was my house.
Where am I at?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got into the community group. And then, from there, the Jellisons, handed the group over to the Jumps, which was obviously Andy is such a big part of this, and that just kind of segues, I guess, me into how did I become a community group leader. I recall that you preached a sermon sometime maybe shortly after COVID or during COVID when you really were calling up young men to plant where they're at, where you live, learn, work, and play, settle down and play.
Yes.
And
I think, because you asked me about this before, and I thought about it, I think it might have been my Vision Sunday. Years ago, I preached on Jeremiah 29 and basically seek the good of the city, and build your homes there. And this call,
that was it, yeah. And so I recall calling you that day and saying, Kyle, I love you, but you've preached me out of your church.
Yeah.
And
the emphasis on local, the emphasis on love where you live kind of thing,
Yep. So, I mean, you've said it before, but I love this church, but I love my city.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where I was, in my heart. And so I talked to you, and you said, hey, I support you in whatever you do, wherever you go. And I called Andy Jump, and Andy Jump, just in the way only Andy Jump can, just gives you some kind of encouragement. I mean, that guy could give encouragement. And so he said, man, I've been waiting on this phone call. He said, I can tell.
That's like something a dad says to you.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for you to call me about this. That's right.
He said, I could tell that you were ready to get back to Lexington. And I had shared my vision of, I'd love to see Two Cities in Lexington, but it was very distant. But Andy really made it feel like it could really happen.
Yes.
And he said, well, listen, I think it's you that could, the I see in you.
Yes.
I heard that from Andy.
Yes.
And he said, I think it's you that could bring two cities to Lexington. Let's do it. Let's go. And I was ready to run through a wall.
Yeah.
After the
Oh, yeah.
conversation.
When is this exactly? Remind me, timeline, roughly.
This was probably
2022?
mid to late 2021.
Okay. So late. Okay. So at this point, so you start the first, and there are many more. There are more now. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But you start the first Lexington group. Talk about the process of starting a group that's going to be. I can't remember this. Did you lead and host it at first, or did you find another family to host it? How did this group, that's now become 3 groups, soon to be 4 or 5 groups, how did this first group start?
Yeah. So really, the problem that Chelsea and I had was, as we were looking to start a group, we had nowhere to go because we were at the time homeless. We were building a home right in the midst of trying to start a group, and we had invited our friends, the Lamoureux, Mark and Lori Lamoureux, here, and they, towards COVID, they were watching online and just kind of continued to watch online for a while, and then you kind of called them up and out, and they were like, "Hey, we're coming back to church. We're getting all in." And so I remember Mark and I were walking out of church, maybe the first Sunday he came back, and he said, "Man, I want this in Lexington." And I was like, "Yeah, exactly. Let's do it." And so I actually had mentioned to him, I'm like, "Do you think you could host a community group?" And anybody that knows his wife, Lori, she's not someone who just loves people in her home. So
it's a big ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he said, I tell you what, let me talk to Lolo. That's what he calls her. He said, let me talk to Lolo and I'll get back with you. And, they were so generous in opening up their home and starting the group. And that's where it really all started.
But it's great because then you have 2 families that are really, in a good community group, the community group leader, that couple usually, and the host couple, I always call them they're like the marriage, the husband and wife that can handle the crazy kids and chaos of that sometimes or many times can be a group. And so you start out, you've got your 2 families. What's it like at first? Does it grow quickly? Does it grow slowly? What does that group look like?
Yeah, so I think we were at 19 people, maybe 3 weeks in.
Wow.
So
that's a full group.
Yeah.
With kids and everything else.
Right
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a lot of kids. We had, I think, somewhere between 11 and 13 kids on top of that.
That's where you're going into like, do we need 3 babysitters kind of thing?
Oh, yeah.
I've been there.
Oh, yeah. We were struggling to keep babysitters.
Yeah.
And with all those kids.
Pay for their counseling afterwards. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. But so we had a large group and have maintained that. I think we've got 19 on the roster right now, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but Mark literally just launched a group.
Yes.
So we went from 21 to maybe 12, and now we're at 19 again. And so, it's just growing rapidly.
So how many groups are down there now? Is it 3?
So 3 officially, and then 1 that meets in Lexington part of the time.
And we're hoping to launch more, I know, especially with the interest meeting and the launch team and the weekenders coming up. We're hoping to have a couple more Lexington groups, which I'm excited about. You've said this phrase a couple times, and you said Mark said it to you too. You said, as I'm listening to this conversation, man, I wish we had 2 cities in Lexington. And I've always described the people that are on this launch team as people who love our church and love their city. What do you mean? And what does Mark mean when they say we want this? Like, what is this? What do you love about 2 cities that you want in Lexington? Why do you think Lexington is ready for something like this? Or I don't know what the right word is. Yeah. Poised. I want to be very careful because obviously there's lots of great churches in Lexington.
Absolutely.
And let me just say it right on this podcast. We believe it takes all types of churches to reach all types of people. And I'm excited about, I consider myself the pastor of a church and a pastor of that church. And so I love all pastors. They're my favorite people. I want to help them. I want to be helped by them. So this is not a critique on intention. This is not a critique on churches in Winston, or in Lexington. But I have heard that from Lexington. I've heard that from King people. I've heard that from different places. What do you mean, man? I want 2 cities to be in Lexington. It's got something that at least it appears we don't have down here.
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I think there's a few things. One, I think, is the preaching. I think that's one of the things that leads a lot of people to 2 cities. Many of the people that I invite talk about that as soon as they leave, they're like, man, the preaching there is just something, and the worship. When you have good preaching and teaching and worship, everything else kind of falls.
Yeah, it creates an
falls in
environment.
its
That's right.
place.
That's right.
And so, but I think the next thing is definitely the community. Community groups are something that I don't know of, but maybe 2 churches in Lexington that do that.
Are most churches in Lexington, this is a good thing, but they're doing the model of Sunday school, I'm guessing, of some sort.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, I think the community is everything. To do life together is something that people in Lexington are not used to. There's a large portion of people who are in Lexington who have experienced some type of church hurt, just because of the very rule-based, religious-based churches that are in that area, and so that's a whole nother.
Interesting. So each geography or each city will usually have. I'm making an observation here. Will sometimes have churches that they go wrong in different ways, and so what you see in big cities, in my opinion, is you see a lot of churches. You go to any major city and you go to the biggest buildings downtown, and they're usually theologically liberal. Right. They usually have left the gospel, and they've become worldly. They don't have anything to say to the world. What you're exactly right though. In smaller towns, they tend to become more religious.
Right.
I'm using that word in a wooden sense.
Yeah.
They become more territorial. They become more rule based.
Yeah.
And again, there's lots of great churches in Lexington, but you're just saying in smaller towns like Lexington, there is a lot of church hurt. We've seen that even here in Winston with 516 churches, supposedly around here somewhere. Yeah. So let me go back to the question. So with Lexington coming down here, okay. So let's talk about why did we decide to do this now? Okay, like why now? Because we're trying to, and I've tried to say this. I really want. I said this when I launched the Lexington idea with the whole church that we like to make things happen by the grace of God. But it's much more exciting when things are happening to you, and you feel like, man, you almost sense the hand of providence. Yeah. And I you know how much I love Lexington. We've talked about it. I really do. The more I go down there, eat Nick's Burgers, all that. I mean, I really do love it. The more I'm living in North Carolina, I'm like, I want to hunt, I want to fish, I want some land. I love Lexington. Yeah. I really do. But I've told you this, but it would have not been the first place I thought 2 cities would go after being in Winston. Like it wasn't on my radar, even though I every time I go to Charlotte Airport, I drive by, and I realize you guys live 20, 25 minutes closer to the airport than I do. But I would have thought Kernersville, just I knew it more. Or I would have thought, I'm making this up, but Advance or Moxville even. Like I just was more familiar with those areas. I was less familiar with Lexington. Yeah. Here we are heading to Lexington. Basically what has happened, I want to, and if people are listening, this will be a little repetitive, but I want us to sync the narrative here. We had 3 community groups with roughly 50 people who finally we had, I guess, what you'd call a critical mass where we said, and you and I talked, I haven't mentioned this publicly, but we talked 6 months ago about when is the right time, you know? And we felt like, let's use the strategic slowness of the summer to try to build something. Now we got to talk about. So let's talk about leading up to the first interest meeting. We haven't had the second interest meeting. We'll see what happens there, and I'm expectant and excited. But you and I had a conversation after the interest meeting. So going into this interest meeting, which is, let's remind everybody, that was on June 30th. I made an announcement, I think twice. I said, if you're interested in being on a launch team, come on downstairs after the 11 o'clock. I didn't know how many people were going to show up. It's always like, you want to put words around things like, this is an experiment. We'll see what happens, because you want to trust God, but you don't want to presume upon the grace of God. But you told me, like, you were a little nervous. If you don't mind sharing just for a second, and I get it. You're like, dude, I'm in. I want to bring this down to Lexington. Talk to us about how you were feeling leading up to the interest meeting we just had, and then your experience afterwards.
I was feeling a weight, and I told you on the phone. When I walked in the church, I realized this is real. It's this week. Yeah. This is the day. We're going to find out if there's a critical mass or not.
Yes.
And there were actually a lot of people from our groups, Mark and the Santos group, Trent and Sydney, which have been a great family.
We can't forget
too.
them as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
You 3 couples really have been.
Yeah. And but there were a few people out, and I was aware of that, and so I was like, man, is this
right? Each of the three groups was like, hey, I got a couple people who can't make it. You guys are starting to think, is this going to be 20 people?
Yeah. And so, if it's 50 and we're missing, 20, is this going to look, Kyle's going to go, man, there's nobody here, and so
let's wait another year. Yeah.
And so I was actually singing one of the worship songs and Donovan was leading it. And, as I was singing the song, I really the Holy Spirit just really hit me and said, are you really believing what you're singing? Because it was, I trust in God.
Oh yeah.
And so I really had to just think, man, am I trusting in God? And that's something that some of the young guys that I disciple a lot, I asked one of them, he was talking about issue that he was having. He was struggling and stressing, and I just asked him a simple question. I said, are you trusting in yourself or are you trusting in God? And that was a moment that I was like, man, I'm trusting in me and what I can do, and I'm going to fail.
Yeah.
And so, the grace of God.
Yeah.
Thank goodness I was able to overcome all that anxiety and stress, because it was very, very stressful. But then when we got downstairs,
yes,
oh man,
it was a relief. Yeah, talk about that. So we had we've already talked about the numbers, but we had well over 100 people there. Mm-hmm. And but talk about what were some of your takeaways? Seeing the people in the room, these people. I think I'll give you an example. There was a guy, we did a Q&A, which is always kind of dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, any questions? And got a lot of great questions. And one of the guys said, hey, I want to know some version of I want to know who in here actually lives in Davidson County. And I was like, oh no, what is this? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then I just said, hey guys, will you raise your hand if you live in Davidson County? And almost every hand in the room went up. And I was like, that was a moment for me where I'm like, I think this is going to, I don't know what the right word is. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to take off, because we have 100+ people here who love our church and love their city and live in it. Right. And they love Davidson County. They don't want to live in Forsyth County. They live down there, and they want to, what we always say here, they want to live, learn, work, and play. Yeah. And so, what I'm excited about, and I want to get back to the thing, is I think that as we do this Lexington Community Gathering, which we hope one day, maybe we can talk about this a little bit, we hope one day becomes a campus. But we're not calling it that quite yet for many reasons we could talk about. But what gets me excited is I really believe the church is going to feel much more local. I know it is for everyone in Lexington. Yeah. It's going to be 10 minutes from your house. You can go to Nick's Barbecue after. I keep mentioning Nick's. I got to give them. I don't get any money for this. Yeah, I just love them. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That was one of my observations. What other observations did you have? Kind of being in that room for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, looking around, getting there early, staying afterwards. I know you were encouraged, but tell us why you were encouraged.
Yeah, I got to stay around and speak to a lot of the folks and kind of answer some questions, and it was great. But one of the things, I guess, that my realization from it was who are these people?
So you didn't recognize a lot of them?
The majority of them I've never really seen, not heard of. And
and I'll say, as one of the pastors here, I was encouraged because I actually did recognize a lot of them. And I was like, man, I looked around the room and I was like, for a lot of people, I'm like, I didn't know that you lived in Lexington. Yeah. I had no idea. And, what was so encouraging to me on just a small note is I'm seeing people sit there, and several people were wearing TCC Kid shirts. I'm like, you guys are in.
Yeah.
One of the things we saw, and you and I talked about this immediately afterwards, is when people texted I think we had 100 and some people there, and we said text Lexington to 39808, and I think that meeting, people texted more later, but we had 90 of them immediately do that. So we were able to follow up with those 90. And of the 90, I might be off a little bit, but of the 90, 76 of them had gone through our weekender.
Yeah.
So I'm like, these people are not, looky-loos, just kind of coming in and, you're doing something no, these are, for the most part, people who've been in our church. I think I also asked them at one point, I said, guys, who here has been here since Northwest Boulevard, which means at least 6-8 months?
Yeah.
Almost every hand went up.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, these people have been with us for a while. They love our church, but they're ready to bring an extension and expression of it.
Yeah.
Any other observations from that first meeting? Just as you think about it.
Yeah, I was super encouraged. I'm kind of like you said, when almost every hand went up when you asked who was from Davidson County.
I know you love that, dude.
That was.
I was like, you're like, these are my people.
Yeah, I turned around and kind of. You didn't look back at me, but I looked at you like, yeah, I told you so.
This is going
to happen. Yeah,
this is definitely going to happen, man. Well, so then we need to talk about we're going out of order a little bit, but I'm trying to put the whole thing together. So there was, we needed two things to begin a gathering. The first thing we needed was a group of people. We have that now. We know we have that by God's grace. I safely feel like saying we're going to have at least 150 people that are like, we'll launch it. That's bigger than the launch team we had to launch this whole church that we're now in. Okay. So I'm convinced of that. So the second thing that we need is a place. So that's where I got this story out of order a little bit, but as we started to have more people, I said to you, or we had multiple conversations. You probably talked to Caleb, and we kind of said, hey, we need a place.
Yeah.
And so tell the story, because we did the whole tag you're it. And then you came back and said, I found it. And it's right near where you work and your building. And so can you just, whatever would be appropriate, can you just share a little bit about, because that's such a key thing. I mean, at one level, I know that the average missionary goes, well, we can meet anywhere. And I believe that. We can meet outside under trees. But I mean, it's 2024 in America. We need, usually, the average person would like something that looks like a room. I'd like it to have air conditioning. I'd like, we'd like to be able to meet when it's freezing out or hot out. We'd like to not be rained on. So we needed some type of building. We didn't need anything too special. But talk about what you found, how you found it, because this is where we're talking about the future now. This is where we're headed September 15th. I mean, it's going to be here before we know it. I mean, here we are. It's July right now. It's like we're going to be there. So talk to us about it.
Yeah. So I actually met with Dave and Caleb in a coffee shop.
In Lexington?
In Winston.
Oh, okay.
And
by the way, pause. Best coffee shop in Lexington. I'll put you on the spot.
I'll get in trouble for that.
Okay. Tell me after the podcast.
Split,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So you're with Dave and Caleb at a coffee shop in Winston. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they basically said, maybe something the size of this room. We're thinking if you can get something that'll seat 50 people, 75 would be good.
Yep. Kind of start small.
That's kind of what we're
looking
to do. And originally we were kind of calling it a watch party to begin with. And so I went looking, and actually Trent Santos and I just got together one day and just rode around downtown because and we didn't go here, but early on you kind of asked me. You said, okay. The tag you're at happened a few different times, right? So one was you said we need 3 to 5 community groups, for the critical mass, right? And then another was you said, look, I don't know Lexington and you do. I want you to pray and think about where it needs to be.
Yeah,
and I did, and downtown was, overwhelmingly
makes sense,
obvious,
and that even fits the model of our church, which is wherever you're going to go to the center of it.
Yeah. And so. Trent and I, we rode around and just kind of looked downtown and really couldn't find anything, but I made quite a few phone calls and had a couple options, but nothing really worked out. And then I had told Mark, hey, if you hear of anything, let me know. And he had went to his real estate agent who helps him sell some houses and things. And they had a big room in the back, and they're like, Mark's like, hey, man, go check that out.
Yeah.
And so I did. I followed up on it, and that's kind of how I found the building is Mark kind of brought it to me. And it just so happened that it was, right in the front of our parking lot at the funeral home. So
so a couple key things, just takeaways. Number one, you went into downtown. We found something in downtown. Number two, it's next to one of your buildings. And so the nice thing about that is we have parking. Which is a big deal. Yeah. Number three, it's bigger than what we initially were looking at. Like if we said 50,
right,
this is going to seat closer to 100.
Yeah.
We're working on all the details of this, but we kind of say we think around 90, and we're actually, we'll know more after this next interest meeting that we're about to have and a couple other things, but we're wondering, I think right now we're really asking the question, not are we starting with multiple services, but how many services, which feels very similar. I'm just telling you, I don't know, you weren't with us at the very beginning, but this feels very similar to how Two Cities launched. Yeah. We found Goler by driving around we wanted to be in downtown, drove around, built a relationship. We were going to do one service. Like, let's just be the night church. We'll do a 5:00 service. And then we started to see interest. And we thought we need 2 services, which as a church, I don't know that I know another church plant that started with 2 services in the sense of it was a spirit of expectation. God is doing something. And so we did that. In the same way, we're looking, going, we've already had 166 people as of this afternoon text in interest in the Lexington. And that may represent families. That's a lot of... Yeah. And so we're going, are we starting, and I don't know the answer yet, we'll work all this out over the next month or two, but are we starting with 3 services?
Yeah.
Are we going to have 3 services here at Industry Hill, and are we having 3 services in Lexington day one? And then what will this become? Dream with me for a second. Again, I know sometimes we're afraid to do this. I'm not saying you're afraid to do this, but sometimes people are afraid to dream because we're afraid to get disappointed. I feel that. I feel part of, just to be honest, we've done what you might call a tiered or tempered approach with this. Mm-hmm. We've said, hey, let's call it a Lexington Community Gathering before we would call it a campus. And by the way, I'm going to, and I've told you this, but I want the people listening to know this. My plan is sometime no later than this fall, I'm going to do a podcast where I think someone's going to interview me. And I'm just going to explain campuses. Yeah. Just why are we doing them? What are they? How do they differ from church plants? Why are we doing campuses? Why would we do video preaching? I mean, all those questions I can answer for another whole podcast. But what I do want to say is our hope would be to have a campus long-term or short-term in Lexington. Yeah. But and when we get to the campus, I'm going to talk about this in another podcast, so I don't want to go fully down this road. But you're talking about live worship. You're talking about a campus pastor. Right. You're talking about a full kids ministry. You're talking about age and stage ministries at the building. You're talking about anything that's essential that we do here at Industry Hill, we will do at a campus. Yeah. And they will be, a brother, a twin. They're not just a brother. They're not a cousin. They're a twin, Yeah. So that's where we're going to head. But even just this was something that God put on your heart years ago. And started with a community group. This is how God does things, humbly and incrementally. Dream for a second. We are, as of today, about 2.5 months away from opening, whatever you want to call it. Launch Sunday. I mean, on September 8th at the height of our Heights conference, we are going to commission everybody on stage and send you guys out. And then you're not on your own because we're holding the rope and we're helping you and all that. But at that moment, it's like y'all are, in the weirdest way, we talk about saying a gospel goodbye and moving for mission. You're more like coming home for mission, in the best sense of the word. Okay, I'm talking a lot. Let me stop. What do you think is going to happen? Like if you could, Lexington, our church, a lot of this team, you kind of know, the area. What do you think?
Yeah. So, this has been something that's been my vision from a long time ago that like I said, Andy Jump really ignited the fire for me.
Come on.
And so I've been very conservative about it. But if you were to ask Mark and Trent and they were here, the answer you would get is this is going to explode.
And in a good way.
Yes.
Not implode, explode.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And what does that mean? What do you think's going to happen?
Yeah,
or what does Mark and Trent, when they're talking, they know their friends, what do they think's going to happen?
Yeah, I think there's been so many people, and you've talked about this before, but the come and see ministry come and see evangelism is just really non-existent for us. When you talk about people, at High Rock Lake, where it's a 45-minute drive one way here, they may come visit 1 week. I had a couple families join me about 4 weeks ago from that area, and they may come visit 1 week and tell us how much they love it, but it's not sustainable for them to continue and to do community and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of people who are have been in the waiting. Because we've been putting out the word like, hey, we're coming. Yeah. It's just a matter of when, not if. And there's a lot of people that are just kind of sitting there waiting in Lexington.
Yeah, I hear you saying.
And so I think that it's really going to be big quick. And Lexington big and Winston big is
a little different. I completely understand that. And I think, this is something I'll talk more about when we talk about campuses in the future. But I do think that what this is going to do, and I said it earlier, but just to bring it all back, I think it's going to make the church feel so local, which is going to make the church so much more effective for the people in Lexington. Yes. Because one of my mentors, Larry Osborne, who actually is one of the first people in the United States, he's in his 70s now. He was like one of the first 10 churches ever to start campuses. And what he said, he's been doing them now for 30 years or 20 years, whatever it is. He said what he found is that whenever you do campuses, which that's where we're headed with Lexington Community Gathering, He said 2 things happen if you don't do campuses. He says you no longer get come and see evangelism because the average person will not drive more than 20 minutes to go to church. And we have Lexington people who love it. We'll do it, but they're neighbors, they're lost friends, they're coworkers, they're classmates. They're not coming.
Right.
And the other thing is, and I think this is really important because we have a growing church. I know you've got a family. I've got a family with kids still in the home. But and I'm seeing how important student ministry is, particularly because I think when your kids are young, you can go, well, we'll just drive up to 2 cities from Lexington. We'll drop them off at kids ministry, and they'll love it, and that'll kind of be our Sunday morning. As soon as you get a kid in middle school, high school, you start going. They do a lot, and I don't know that depending on where you live in Lexington, like you're saying. Lexington could mean 20 minutes or it could mean 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I'm just like, man, that people are not going to be able to engage. So that's why we're excited. Like we genuinely feel like we're going to be able to. Part of for us, we had to know before we were ready to do this. I'll speak kind of from the church standpoint, the organizational standpoint. Before we were ready to go, we could do a Lexington Community Gathering. We had to know who we were.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we're clarifying our values and clarifying our mission statement and doing all these different things. So let's end with a couple last things about Lexington because I want to just tell me what are some of your just like when you think because some of our people their heart is getting toward Lexington as I'm talking about it. Like I've told you, we've had community groups go down there and pray, and I'm not trying to have you pit one business against another, but tell us like. What are some of your favorite things? If some of our church wanted to come down and just spend some time in Lexington, pray over Lexington, bring their family down to have a meal, hang out, like what are some of your favorite things to do or to tell others to do in Lexington?
Yeah, so obviously eat barbecue is Lexington is known for barbecue.
So where do we go? I mean, you don't have to just give us one. Give us like 2 or 3 then. Where do you say like get and what kind of barbecue do we need to get? All
right, so in Lexington, you've got one kind of barbecue. And it's usually you can get it. It's shoulder or butt, and you're getting chopped or sliced. I mean, that's basically what you can get. Not like brisket typically, but there is a good place for brisket. Lexington barbecue, which locals call the Honey Monk or the Monk.
The Honey Monk. That's the local language. I did not know this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the place that the presidents usually go to eat when they're around this area and that kind of thing. The barbecue.
And when you say presidents, you mean presidents of the United States of America.
That's right.
Yes. We've had U.S. sitting presidents come and eat at the Honey. What's it called?
Honey Monk.
The Honey Monk. Why that? Why is it called that?
The folks who own the business are the monks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one. Another barbecue place?
Barbecue Center is really good.
Okay.
Yeah. And barbecue wise, I've always enjoyed like Shoto's, which is downtown. I know a lot of the groups.
Yeah, I want to go local, man. I'm not coming to Lexington to eat Applebee's.
Yeah.
I want to eat. Yeah.
A lot of the groups that have came down that I've talked to that have come down and walked down Main Street.
Yeah.
And for prayer walks and things like that, which has just been overwhelming.
So powerful
from the church, and the people of the church. But yeah, I mean, those are some good spots.
Now, hold on. There's also. I'm trying to think of a couple other things. Someone was telling me there's a very. I don't know if it's famous. There's a clay shooting, like almost like a golf course down in Lexington.
Clay breakers.
Yeah. Where you can go and like you play 14 different like. Only in Lexington. Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, dude, we're going to end it this way. How can we be praying for you? Because I know a lot of our listeners are members of our church, part of our church. They're listening because they want to get to know you and hear about Lexington and hear what's happening. And, the majority of our church is not going.
Yeah.
You know that. It wouldn't be right. They would start having the problem that you're having. Mm-hmm. They'd be driving 35 minutes to go to your church. Yeah. Or not your church, your gathering. So, but how can we pray for you?
Yeah, I mean,
like 1 or 2, 3 specific prayer requests we close.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think long term, we definitely need to pray for where are we going. Mm-hmm. I think that building is going to be sustainable for a short period of time.
Yes,
but I think we're going to outgrow it quickly.
Yes.
So
if you're listening today, and if someone's listening today, and they have a building that they would like to give us, we would love that.
Yes.
If there was a church that was, sadly dying, and they said, we'd love to talk about partnerships.
Yes.
Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. So yes,
good.
that's a big one.
So I mean, I think that's number one. Is like where are we going?
What is going to be our home? We know that where we're currently going to gather and start with 2 or 3 services or whatever or more. That will not be a long-term sustainable. We can't turn that in. You and I talked about this. We can't turn that building into a campus.
Right.
We're going to need a different building to turn the gathering into a campus. Yeah. So that's a big.
And I think that's going to be our biggest holdup.
Yeah. I agree.
I think that's our.
Buildings are usually the biggest holdup for all fast-growing churches.
Yeah.
I mean that's what's happened in the history of our church. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just pray for the lay leaders as we kind of navigate this. Obviously, we knew going into this that it was not going to be easy. There's nothing about church planning, I think, that is easy.
Yes.
And really, to be really honest, I kind of got comfortable here in Winston. When I was coming to community group in Winston and church in Winston, it became a lot.
Yeah.
I actually talked to a guy this week who left our church, 2 cities, because of having to drive twice.
I get it.
From Lexington.
I get it.
And so as I started just coming on Sundays and, I serve one, attend one, or serve together.
Yep.
And then it's just one time a week. And so it's really comfortable for me. So I got into a place I'm like, do we really need this?
Yeah.
But then you have to realize it's not about me.
That's right.
It's about all the people of Lexington who need this, and they're not willing to drive or can't drive that far. And
that's a great point to end on because I completely agree. What I'm so excited about is all the things that this is going to stir up in so many different people. The leaders that this is going to call up.
Yes.
I'm particularly talking, I mean, first of all, when, I sat in that room and I had that thought. Our interest meeting the other day, I thought, okay, if these 150 people leave, these are some of our great kids ministry people. These are some servers in our church. These are some great people that we are going to feel their loss. And so what's going to happen is all the people who go down there with you are going to go, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Because we got to do it. And then it blesses our church because everyone steps up and goes, guys, it's our turn.
Yeah.
We were thinking someone else was going to do this. And so again, we'll talk about this at another time, but church planning and campuses and all this, but it's so good for everybody, even though it's so hard.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about, I already see God, you don't have to talk. I see God working greatly in you and in your marriage and your family. I think God's going to continue to bless it. And so just thank you, man. Thanks in the midst of a busy schedule and running a business. I mean, you have been, I described you, I think when I launched this, you've been high surrender. And I pray that the other people who join this launch team will be as high surrender as you and your family have been. And so thank you for being here today, man. If you guys want more information about the Lexington Community Gathering and all that we're doing, all you have to do is text the word Lexington to 39808, and we're going to get you more information. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope to come back, I don't know if it'll be weeks or months from now, and to do a long-form podcast where I can answer a ton of questions that people might have in regards to campuses and what the whole future of that looks like. So look for that episode in the weeks or months to come, and other than that, I'll see you next week. Thanks.